Deeyah, I just want to start with you. Why do we have this feeling that this is getting worse?
Because it is.
Because it is.
Because it is getting worse. I think that, well, having said that, obviously misogyny and violence against women and the oppression and abuse of women is something that has been going on forever, of course. But I do think that the time that we're living in now, we are seeing a tendency, a reaction to the liberation of women and women's rights being acknowledged as human rights globally. I think one of the counter reactions to that is that we're seeing more violence actually perpetrated against women in reaction to it. So I think we are living in a time, on one hand, where life is getting better for very many women around the world, but I think that it's also becoming far more challenging, where we are seeing much more vicious backlashes towards women, because women are standing up, they're breaking the rules, they're breaking what was traditional, what was the norm, and stepping outside of those boundaries, and there's always going to be reactions towards that. There's always going to be pushback, if not violence.
Where do we see this now? What can you describe the situation around the world?
Well, I think we see, if we are to look at it in the context of, you're saying violence in the name of God, I think we are seeing that with the various religious extremist movements or the various orthodox movements that are growing within pretty much every faith group. I know we hear a lot about Islam, but we're seeing the evangelical far right expanding in places like the US. We're seeing the Orthodox Jewish communities expanding and becoming more and more anti-women as well. So I think in the religious context, I think we're seeing these fringe extremist orthodox movements expanding, and as a result of that, a lot of violence being perpetrated in the name of God. But if you're asking in terms of overall picture of violence against women, I mean, unfortunately, there is no country in the world where women are safe, where women are free from violence. In this country, we still struggle with rape, we're still struggling with domestic violence and intimate partner violence. In Britain and all various European countries, we're seeing different expressions of abuse and oppression and discrimination against women. The style of it varies. So whether it's female genital mutilation, whether it's forced marriage, whether it's honor killings, whether it's a violent partner, whatever the expression of the violence varies from place to place to place. But the fact is, the violence is there everywhere. So we have a very big job ahead of us to try to address it effectively.
What are you doing?
I'm trying to, in the very limited capacity that I can, I am trying to speak up against it. I'm trying to point a light at the fact that it is happening, and it's happening here. It's not just happening over there, it's happening everywhere. And I'm also trying to show, by the way I live my life every single day, that we all have a responsibility to do something. We all have the power to actually take action and do something. And what we can do is we can speak up. That's the first thing we can do. But what we can also do is be there for women who are suffering. We can be there, we can support them, or we can even smile at people. Even that helps. So there is a huge plethora of things that we can do, or we can be on the front lines of activism, or trying to change laws, or trying to hold our leaders to account. So what am I doing is I am trying to utilize my voice, which is much more of a voice of creative and artistic expression, and through that trying to say that this is happening and this is unacceptable, and I choose to, in every act of my life, stand on the side of equality and dignity and human rights for everybody, not just for women, not just for boys, for everybody.
You told me that when you flew Norway, as you actually did as a 70-year-old, the only person who actually came out and said something was an imam. And what did you say?
So I was 17 years old when I left Norway. And it was a public exit in the sense that it used to be on the front covers of, it was on VG, Dagbladet, mobbet ut av Norge, truet ut av Norge, forced out of Norway, threatened out of Norway. And there was complete silence. Nobody, no feminists, no human rights groups, no Pakistani people, no immigrant communities, no nothing. Nobody said anything, except for a couple of, well, actually there were a couple of people who were actually friends of mine, but the only sort of public acknowledgement of this was made by this one guy. He's an imam in Oslo, funded by the state, by the way. I don't know how many millions of kroners his organization used to get. And he, in this newspaper, said, well, I don't support that violence should be perpetrated against her, but really she's kind of, you know, she's kind of asking for it.
She was asking for it.
Yeah.
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 Maryam, is that an experience you share?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you do deal with issues that are considered taboo, when you touch that which is deemed to be sacred, you do get this sort of pushback. I know many times I've been told, well, if you get death threats, well, what do you expect? You shouldn't be talking about these issues. You know they're sensitive. You know,
get death threats.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody who deals with, particularly when it comes with Islam, and I want to add here, not that Islam is any worse than any other religion. I think all religions are equal and equally bad. And I also think, you know, I've said many times, I think religion should come with a health warning, like cigarettes. You know, it kills. Stay away from it, if possible. So I don't think Islam is any worse. I do think it's worse possibly only because it has more political power. And we are going through what I call an Islamic Inquisition, similar to the Spanish Inquisition of the past. So I do find that when you are dealing with these issues, people do say, well, you shouldn't have spoken about it. We've had let's say we've had a public meeting and Islamists have come and threatened us, and the security guard has said, well, what do you expect when you're talking about Sharia? And so on and so forth. So I find that, you know, there is this effort to silence and censor people who are talking about really issues that need to be talked about and need to be discussed. But on the other hand, we're always facing this sort of pushback.
Yeah.
I would just like to add to that it's you have that one act of speaking out against something, and then you receive that kind of treatment. But very often, it's also just being a woman is a provocation in itself. It's not necessarily that you say something, it's just the fact that you are a woman, you are in the public space, just being a woman. and that in itself is a reason enough, So I think it's, when it comes to women's role within that space, I think it's very, very specific how women are targeted, and that women are targeted as ferociously as they are.
It's very easy. I mean, we sit here and talk, and I mean, we are not targeted right now, are we? Or Maryam?
What do you mean you're not?
What kind of threats do you get?
I mean, I hate talking about threats, because I think the Islamists, they feed off of people feeling afraid of them, and that's one way in which they help to silence and suppress dissent. And I think people are very afraid of them. I'm always surprised at how many people are afraid of them. When I started the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, which is an organization of people leaving Islam, doing it publicly because there are threats around it, I was amazed at how many people, men and women who were born in Britain, who were afraid to come out publicly. And so I think the threats are a reality, but there's also a lot of support and a lot of dissent. And I think my problem is that the threats are what we see, but we never see all that dissent that takes place, primarily actually by women, because women are the first targets of the religious right in any context, whether it's the Buddhist right, the Christian right, the Jewish right, and the Islamic right. And the dissenters, whether they're in Iran or Algeria or Pakistan or Nigeria, and from immigrant communities here in Europe, that resistance is so great. But on the other hand, it's often very invisible in mainstream society. And I think that's what we need to stress more, because it's a very hopeful thing as well.
Can you tell me and us a little bit more about your work?
I was born in Iran, and so I was raised in a Muslim family. I was born Muslim, as children are, unfortunately, in this world. Children are not communist children or conservative children or labor children, but they are always some sort of religion, and that is the privilege that religion has in our world today. And so I was born a Muslim out of no choice of my own, and I think most people are born into religion out of no choice of their own. And but again, religion was not a problem in the sense that I wasn't made to veil. I lived in Iran. I went to a mixed school. Religious people are not necessarily psychos and fanatics. It's the religious right that are, and I think it's important to make that distinction. And for me, religion only became very clear when the Islamists took power in Iran, where then I had to veil, then we had someone from the Hezbollahs come to our school to separate the boys and girls, because it's so sinful to have boys, even though we're children, to mix. And so I think it was there that for me it became very clear that religion in power is just really bad news, and it's just something that I need to fight against. And so in the various things I've done, whether it's one law for all and demanding secular laws for everybody, as well as citizenship rights or universal rights, to challenging Islamism's apostasy laws via the Council of Ex-Muslims, or women's equality via groups like Fitna and so on and so forth. Yeah.
You told me earlier that your organization is it's not in vogue, it's invisible still. Why?
I think a lot of the work we do, and also the resistance of women and men in the Middle East and North Africa and South Asia, I think it's because it doesn't fit the narrative that we're often told about, which is the multicultural narrative. I hate multiculturalism. I love that we, not multiculturalism as a lovely lived experience where we have people from all over the world living together. I am on the left, I want open borders. But multiculturalism as a social policy that separates and divides people and, divides groups into communities. So there is this Muslim community, and the Muslim community is seen to be homogeneous, and it's the parasitical imams and the reactionary Islamic organizations that are seen to be the self-appointed leaders of these communities. And so what happens is there's no space for dissent. The dissent becomes invisible. The women who don't want to be veiled, the women who don't want to be killed in the name of honor, the fathers and mothers who don't want to kill their children in the name of honor, that all becomes invisible in a sense. And I think this is what multiculturalism has done, and cultural relativism in a way. It's taken away our citizenship and our shared humanity. And it's important, I think, to go back to basics, where people matter before religion, religious identity and culture and so on and so forth. Thank you.
But how come that such misogyny ideas can actually be spread and seem to gain force? I mean, killing a woman because she was not a virgin on the wedding night, it's such a horror. And how can that be spread now in a modern time, do you think? I mean, we think we are modern right now. And it seems as if such ideas gain power for the time being.
Yeah. It could also be a reaction to modernity, though. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it can also be a reaction to globalization, a reaction to modernity, but also a reaction, a way of sort of regaining and holding on to a sense of masculinity and a sense of what that means. How do men fit into the world? How do, well, violent men, what is my place in a community that's now becoming more fluid and shifting? Women are starting to become educated. Women are starting to enter the workforce, even if your women in your family aren't, but the surrounding ones are. The world is changing. And so I think there's a reaction to that. And that's why, on one hand, we should be, it seems obvious that these very brutal practices should be diminishing, but the fact that they're growing, I think, is exactly because we are a modern world and because we are progressing in a certain way.
But also, can I just add, I mean, I think that the problem also is the fact that misogyny is imposed by the law and the state in many instances. I mean, if you look at Sharia law, it is a form of terrorism against the population at large, and particularly women. And so, in that sense, it's, you know, domestic violence, honor killing is the law in many countries. It's a prerogative of you know, men. And again, not to say that all men accept violence. I think there are a lot of men who are pro women's rights and a lot of women who are misogynists. You know, it goes beyond that. But I also want to add that, you know, the sort of the other side of it is, if you look at just one example, if I can give you, you know, the Afghan woman Farkhunde, who was beaten and stoned and burnt, and her car run over her body and thrown in the river in Afghanistan recently. If you recall her case, you know, she was actually very devout herself, and she had gone to the local imam to tell him off for, you know, selling superstition to other women. And he accused her of being an infidel and burning the Quran, and then a mob killed her. But if you look at the reaction after that, you know, where you had women carrying her coffin and burying her, it goes against Islamic custom, but they agreed, they did that with the approval of her family. And men surrounded the women carrying her coffin. And there was the most influential imam of that area. He tried to come into her burial, even though he had initially said that she deserved to die. And the women surrounded her coffin and didn't let him come next to her coffin, and they pushed him out. And you know what, so, you know, they put a tree where she was buried, and young people, boys, men and women, they called the street where she was killed Farkhunde Street. So what I want to say is that there is this misogyny, but there is also this resistance to it. So there's not just one Afghanistan, there's not just one Muslim community. There is this constant fight in families, in neighborhoods, in communities, in societies at large. And it's important for us to see, you know, that this demand for universal rights is a demand that people are having in the smallest villages, in, you know, faraway corners of the world as well.
Could I just comment on that particular case, because there's a further development in that case that is incredibly important. Some of the people who are active in killing her have been sentenced, some of them to death, which I oppose, but still they've been sentenced. But even more important, 11 policemen who were standing by watching her being killed have actually been sentenced to prison. So it's sort of gone from how the community reacted, how the women reacted, into the formal system. So although it is a horrible, horrible thing to say, maybe her life wasn't totally in vain, in the sense that, if you understand what I mean, in the sense that it might create some changes, not only in these women, you know, the women stood up, they felt empowered to do that, but also possibly formally. Maybe next time the policemen will think we can't just stand by and watch, because we might go to prison for that.
Cecilie, since you and Peder just talked now, you told me just a few minutes ago that your opera, this opera exhibition, or what should I call it? This opera was actually inspired by a sentence from Amnesty.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that sentence was violence against women is the biggest human rights scandal in the world today.
Yeah.
And I had to read the phrase, I think, 10 times before it really dawned upon me how terrible it was, and then we started research. I worked with Bibi Mosleth, a dramaturg and librettist, and through that research we were all the time thrown towards religion, because we had to find out why is half of the world's population treated this way, and why doesn't it stop? We know it's wrong, it doesn't stop. So through a lot of research, religion just came into the project, whether we wanted it or not. And so it became also a critique of literal religion, and how dangerous these texts can be when you take them as such. So
there's a lot. The holy texts.
Yes, the holy texts, and the Bible and the Quran. And both the Bible and the Quran is written by men, and it's written for men. And so, you know, women, they come very bad out of this kind of thing because they are, in fact, hardly human beings in a certain sense. They are presented, and that's what also makes the book so dangerous. So we decided that we had to go into the project in a society critical way, and try to find out and try to speak out about the elephant in the room. And so this opera is in fact, it's about the elephant in the room.
And the elephant is religion, as you see it?
It's the religious, cultural footprint that we find everywhere, and which is also triggered by or which lies inherent in these holy texts. And therefore, in fact, makes it difficult to go further on, because it's stating some things, they are holy and you can't change them, and things has to be changed, and we can't be equal before violence against women stops. And then we have to, turn every stone to try to find out where this violence comes from, and why doesn't it stop, and why does it take such a long time?
Yeah. But it's just to sit here, we can think, oh well, I am not threatened. I live in Norway. It's quite a good life being a woman in Norway, and we have all the rights, we think. And for me, it's a very long way going from where we are till we see what is happening with women other places in the world. But you, Deeyah, you have pointed out several times that this is happening not only over there somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, violence against women is not something that happens over there anywhere. It happens here. It happens here. It's your neighbor, it's your colleague, it's your friend, it's your uncle. It happens here, and we now have immigrant communities, minority communities in these countries, that when our parents came here, they didn't leave behind their baggage, their sort of social, cultural, religious, the way of living and the way of raising your children, the way of also disciplining and punishing people who step outside. They didn't leave all of that behind. So that has come here. So parts of that way of dealing with the world is here. But that's also not to say that that's the only place you find violence against women. This is, I constantly want to keep trying to point out, it's absolutely a fact that the more religious a country is, the more violence against women you see. That's research, that's a verified fact. Having said that, there's something else also going on here, because even in secular, atheist communities and families, you still see violence against women. So it's not the only driving factor. It is a significant factor, but it's not the only driving factor. That's why I keep coming back to, there is something else happening underneath it. There's a reason a man hits a woman. He can use the excuse of, I'm doing it because it says it in this book, or I'm more righteous if I do this. Of course they can use that, but there's something else there as well, and I think we have to start looking at that. We have to start looking at gender roles, we have to start looking at masculinity, we have to start looking at what is it that it means to be a man today in the world that we live in. We see pornography, we see a certain portrayal of what it means to be a man in movies, in video games. We see these expressions of manness associated very closely to violence very often. So we have to start looking at violence and masculinity as much as we need to be looking at this bag over here of religiosity.
Before Gunnar Stålsett get to say anything here, I just wanted to, because you talked about how it seems as if the success of IS, Islamic State, is now powering religious groups outside Islam. I think you said something about that, Maryam.
I mean, I think, when you see the rise of the Islamic right. You also see a corresponding rise. We have seen a rise in, let's say, the Christian right, the Buddhist right. You know, the Buddhist right is massacring Muslims in Myanmar and Sri Lanka. The Jewish right, you know, and so I think it is, you know, they all belong to the same religious right movement, and they do learn from each other, use similar arguments, and become more powerful as a result. We're also seeing a rise in the far right in Europe, for example, and I think it's because they do fundamentally come from the same place. And that's why I think in our analysis of things it's important to be against the religious right in general as well, fundamentally, because they are inhuman. You have a lot of let's say far-right groups in Europe, in Norway, in Britain, that oppose Islamism, but really fundamentally they're opposed to immigrants, they're opposed to Muslims, they're xenophobic, and their arguments are really inhuman, and I think, you know, that's never going to be a solution, because fundamentally they're more like the Islamists than not. Their power might be different, so they might not be able to kill as many people, but they will kill just as many if they had that same amount of power. And I think that's why it's really important to have, you know, humanity at the center of our analysis, women, men, you know, and start from there, you know. And I think going back to basics, as I mentioned, universal rights, citizenship, is where we can start really making inroads and moving forward, seeing people as human first and foremost.
Gunnar Stålsett, you have been quiet for a long time, and you have also seen the opera.
Yeah, I have. All religion is interpreted religion. All interpretation is human and thereby fallible. From where do we come when we interpret? We come with religious traditions, we come with cultural traditions, we come with psychological antennas, and we see it within every religion and in the relationship between religions that interpretations combat each other. Today, one of the most important trends globally, which I think both of you were referring to, is the combination of religious and national extremism. We see it in every region and in every religion. I happen to work within the framework of an organization called Religion for Peace. We have headquarters in New York. We have programs in more than 90 countries, and we address these issues on the national level and global level. In this organization, Religion for Peace, we bring together religious leaders of every observation, Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, and so on. One of the challenges that we found very early was that if you define religious leadership, the majority, 99%, are men. So we had to say, we are not speaking about leaders, but about leadership. And thereby, we actually had a quota in order to get in the woman voice. And I believe in the struggle that we are discussing here, the voice of women is crucial in order to combat fundamentalism in every shape and every sort. Fundamentalism is basically anti-democratic. Fundamentalist is anti-feminist. Fundamentalism is anti-human rights. On all these scores, there is an alliance between different religions and different traditions. I think that you developed well that it's more complex than speaking only about religion. I think that when we see, and you spoke about the situation in Norway, for instance, if we see that women are not treated equal with men when it comes to appointments, powers of position, and wages and so on, that has nothing to do with religion. It is not because of religion that Telenor doesn't appoint a woman as chairperson. It's more complex than that. So we have to continue to press for the root causes. In the discussion globally on human rights, we see a reaction from certain religious quarters, a combination between the Vatican and the highest authority in the Muslim world and so on, where they say traditional rights are superior to human rights. Mm-hmm. And that has been a concrete, specific discussion at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. Mm-hmm. And my argument against that is that if traditional rights say you should have circumcision of a girl, you should have forced marriage and so on, can you really say that these rights should be above human rights? Mm-hmm. My point is that if you speak about humanism and feminism, we have to use that as an argument and as a goal in every discussion with religion. We cannot fancy a world without religion. So we'll have rather to say, is there a strategy by which on a human platform we're able to try to begin to speak the same language and develop the same values? In my view, we have it in the human rights legacy of the Charter of the United Nations, of the Human Rights Declaration, of the Declaration of Tolerance. In a discussion with Kofi Annan, he probably tried to accommodate a religious leader by saying, there is nothing wrong with religion, it is the religious people. And I said, I beg to disagree. There is something wrong in all religions as they appear in history. Mm-hmm. This is a challenge, and I see no front. I see no front when we speak about humanism, no legitimate division between a genuine understanding of transcendence as something greater than what we can fathom in biology and chemistry and nature, and simply saying, with that larger than myself, larger than thou, we are able to move forward towards an understanding of women's rights, which is human rights which is rights for both genders.
Why do you...
Deeyah.
Okay, so I was just going to ask, why do you think that religious leadership across all the borders, why is there such a reluctance to acknowledge the life, the human life that resides within a woman as something sacred? Why is there such resistance to acknowledge that and support it and to really view women as full and complete human beings? What is that? Why is this so hard?
Yeah, well, I think that what we have been sharing here is something fundamental human, and it is reinforced by tradition and by religion and by ideology. So we speak about something that is broad and universal. I think some of you were referring to that. And that does not take neither religion nor ideology or whatever out of the equation. They are all in there. But I don't think that the answer lies in whether you believe in God or not, but it is in the understanding of belief in God, whether it inspires you to see in your fellow human being an equal person with yourself, or whether you need to reject the image of God in order to be able to feel yourself as a free person.
But religion is very important.
So there are three persons here now trying to... Maryam was first, then Cecilie.
Can I make a few points, please? One is on the issue of, yes, it's not just religion that causes violence against women, patriarchy. I think capitalism as well, the fact that there is profit to be made from violence against and discrimination against women. But religion is very big reason for violence against women. If you take religion out of the equation, that's one mass serial murderer out of the question, out of the picture. So it is a huge part of the picture, and I disagree that it's a question of interpretation, because we hear that all the time, it's if only it was interpreted better. And there's verses in the Quran, for example, that says, if a woman is disobedient, you first confine her, and then you discipline her, and then you beat her as a final thing. And we're always told, oh, well, it's great, because then they used to beat women senselessly, and now at least you've got to first confine her and this and that, and then beat her. And then there'll be Islamic feminists, which I think is an oxymoron, saying, well, it doesn't mean beats as hard as you want, as long as you don't leave any marks on the body, that's fine, you don't break any bones. And my point is that we live in the 21st century. Religion was written for a very long time ago. It needs to stay a very long time ago. And today we have different norms that have been fought for by people, by social movements that belong to us, to all of us, and that's something we need to rely on. The other thing I wanted to say is that I think the solution is actually not bringing together religious leaders or leadership, even if there are women in the Iranian parliament that defend stoning to death. It's not enough to have women in leadership positions. I think we need to work for secular societies and secular world, and that means please keep your religion in your religious places, in your mosques, in your temples, in your churches. Society is for citizens. And if you want peace, that there is no religion for peace. Religion for peace is only when it's private, when its back is to the wall, and it doesn't have political power, in my opinion. So I think the solution for women in particular is not more interfaith, more religious leaders coming together and speaking. The answer is keep them out of the public space.
Cecilie.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's a huge problem because a lot of pages of the holy books has to be deleted if you are going to take out all the violence. These books are extremely violent. If it's the Deuteronomy, the books of Moses, or if it's the Quran, there's so much violence there, and especially not benefiting women. So I think it's too easy to say that it's a question of interpretation, as you say. It's a question of that there are some statements in these books which in fact are there, and they can be used at any time against women, and that is an enormous problem. And it is, it's in our spine, it's in our cultural inheritance and baggage. I mean, I learned at school about Adam and Eve and the apple, and whom was tempting the other, and whom, and all that stuff. We weren't told. There was no critical thinking around all the violence in these books. We were just presented with that.
Yeah.
So no, I think it's a problem.
Yeah. Yes, it is a problem.
What do we do?
The discussion's gone in a different direction. I can make that point later.
Let me just follow up this one about interpretation. Interpretation is an historical phenomenon also. If you look at the development of Christian faith through history, with the Renaissance, with the Reformation, with the Enlightenment and the theological debate at that time, and with the understanding and support of the human rights foundation and building, I think that in my faith, I believe in Jesus as a prophet and one whom I think has given an answer that I would like to follow. And he says, "You have heard it has been said, but I tell unto you." So there is a critical, self-critical mandate which I think has to be applied and is applied. You don't find in the Christian churches broadly today any support of slavery, any support of those issues which were raised in Adam and Eve. We have been able to free ourselves from obscure images and way of thinking which has been reflected in the Holy Scriptures. And we have come to a level of understanding which makes it possible for you as a humanist and myself as a Christian to walk together in the streets, as we have done again and again in Oslo, against racism, against neo-fascism, against the war in Iraq, and for the rights of women. So there is that basis where I don't violate my Christian faith by doing so, and you don't compromise with your secular position by going there arm in arm with a Jewish or a Muslim or a Christian clergy.
Before we enter now a theological discussion, because I think we can go deep into that, I just want some numbers, Peder.
So, what do you want to know?
The numbers.
Statistician is normally not my role, but I'll try. Well, I mean, these numbers are from WHO, most of them, and they're quite shocking. And they themselves say, you know, statistics are always difficult, but what they say is that 1 out of 3 women in the world have been beaten or sexually assaulted or physically assaulted by their partner. These are partner numbers. So 1 out of 3 women, which means around 1 billion women in the world. So it's no wonder that Amnesty International, after I must admit, not having really taken on women's issues for many, many years, in the early 2000s said, you know, we cannot ignore. This is case by case the largest human rights problem in the world. So 1 in 3 women. Another number that I hadn't seen before, which I found astonishing and shocking, 38% of all murdered women are murdered by their partner. 38% of every woman who's killed in a murder is murdered by her partner. Another thing I just found interesting, I think it's interesting in connection with this discussion, and I think we should take into consideration that the UN would normally not touch religion in this sense, but they were sort of listing risk factors, and I think it's interesting to bring into this discussion. Low education, levels of education. Those who use violence have often been exposed to violence as they are children, or been witness to violence in their families. The abuse of different substances, alcohol, drugs, etc. The acceptance of violence, as Deeyah was in, the acceptance of violence within their societies and communities. And I think, but this, of course, what is the reason for this? But the main reason that is the lack of equality between the genders. This is where everything starts and stops. I have loads of other numbers. There's also been a research into sort of differences in different countries. Once again, on violence by intimate partners. The lowest number they found was in urban Japan, 15%. While as the highest number, as far as they're concerned, and I would question this, is in rural Ethiopia, 70%. I'm sure there are other places. But then, as I said, 30% in general of all women in the world have been beaten or raped by their intimate partner.
Is this because of religion or?
Yeah,
well, there are many things. I would just like to make one point on that, if I could, because I've shut up for quite a while now, which is very out of character for me.
It's very out of character. Well done. I've tried to ignore you.
There's one number which is quite interesting, and I think it's from 2007, but it says has gone on for several years, and that is Russia. And they don't have a lot of statistics on this in Russia, but the government in Russia said that 14,000 women are killed by their partner every year, and has been for several years in Russia. I think this was 2007 when they came out with this. And Russia is a society that has been supposedly atheist for 70 years, where religion was repressed. So I think we need to look at other, as Deeyah said, other factors as well. And I think the way, and this is what Maryam also said, I think there is a reason why Eleanor Roosevelt and others said that human rights are individual rights, because I believe that part of the question to Deeyah's, answer to Deeyah's question, why women, is that women have been seen as the property of collectives.
Yeah.
And I think, and I'm not a scientist, but I think that comes out of the fact that they produced babies.
Maryam.
So they are owned by a collective, and they do not have individual rights, because if you decide what you do with your body, for instance, then you might be a threat to our community.
I just wanted to address some of the things you had said. I love having you on the panel.
Likewise.
I mean, just 3 quick points I want to make is, one, that Christianity seems cuddlier today because of the Enlightenment, because it was pushed back and its power limited. And the same needs to be done with Islam. So I think that's key, why it seems different, it seems nicer. That's one issue. The other is, if you look at the gay marriages in Ireland, what a wonderful victory for people there by public referendum. And the Vatican said that it was a defeat for humanity. So that's, Christianity for you, or any religion for you. The second point I want to make is that this doesn't mean that, though I'm an atheist, it doesn't mean that I don't believe in people's right to religion. And it doesn't mean that I think people who are religious are awful. They're not. My father is a Muslim. There are a lot of people who are religious who are wonderful, and atheists who can be misogynist. It's not about people, because I think people are much greater than the religion that's stamped on their foreheads. But I do want to say that religion, though, in this day and age, is not a personal matter. It's an industry, it's a mafia, it's a killing machine, So when I'm talking about the need for religion to be out of the public space, I don't mean individual people's beliefs, but religion as we see it today. And finally, secularism is key, not because it's anti-religion, but because there's space for both people who are religious and not to be able to live with each other. And to do that, we need to keep religion out of the state, for sure, out of the law, out of the educational system, as a minimum, particularly if we want to have women's rights respected.
Could I just ask the question? Because so the secular state right now is France.
I just want to...
Why can't we follow up?
No.
really, let him raise this.
But there are some very... I mean, we can come back to that issue because I think what is moving on here right now, because we see what is happening right in the world, and it seems also as if it's hard to stand up against, as you touched upon very early, Maryam. For instance, the left side's impossibility of moving into these issues and touch them with their hands. And can you just say something about that, and perhaps coming back to your point?
Yeah, I mean, for someone who's on the left myself and believe that the left has always been at the forefront of progressive social movements, I call it a politics of betrayal. They have betrayed the basic principles of social justice, and very often we see the left siding with the Islamists and trying to shut us down by calling it racism and Islamophobia, and silencing dissent and working with the Islamists. And I think part of that goes back to the fact that there's this conflation between Muslims and Islam as a belief and Islamism as a religious right movement, and seeing a defense of Muslims as one and the same as defending Islamism and Islam. And I think it's important to unpack these, to stop conflating these. But also I think the left needs to go back to its original mandate of defending social justice and not defending fascists.
Mm-hmm. You think they defend fascists at the moment?
Definitely, yeah.
How?
I mean, I think a lot on the left. I mean, there's so many examples I can give you, but one was we had a demonstration against Sharia law in front of Downing Street in Britain, and Al-Muhajirun, which is an Islamist group that wants apostates dead, like myself, were there doing a counter demonstration against us. And we had a group called Unite Against Fascism, and I'm against fascism too, which is why I'm opposed to the Islamists. But they came in large numbers, young people carrying the flag of ISIS. Well, now it's ISIS's flag, but it's the Islamic Shahada. And they joined Al-Muhajirun with slogans of Allahu Akbar, which is the thing that makes my hair stand on end, because that's what you hear when people are tortured and executed in Islamic State. So for me, I mean, I felt what a betrayal, I'm the anti-fascist, the Islamists are the fascists, and here you have anti-fascists siding with them against us, and I really think this is such a betrayal of the dissenters, the left, and basic human principles.
Hmm. That's the reason why I wanted to come back to you, actually.
Follow up on that instead.
Yeah.
No, but I totally agree, and I think Deeyah is a very good example, that when she left on the front pages, those who would normally support somebody who was in that situation did not. So I think, and whether it's the left or just intelligent people or whatever, I don't know, but there is a large fear within the spheres or communities or whatever you want to call it, that see themselves as anti-fascist, anti-racism, and so on, to touch these topics when they happen within minority groups. Because they're more scared of being seen as close to Fremskrittspartiet than actually protecting the individuals who are under threat and more than threat. So I think there is a lot of soul-searching that has to go on in a lot of environments, human rights environments as well, on how to be able to stand up properly and sometimes individually for the rights of women who are under threat or being beaten or whatever. Sort of outside of the system. One thing, we've got the sort of shelters and stuff more or less sorted, but sort of to stand up in public and say this out loud, because we are scared of, okay, so you're joining the people who want to throw these people out, or to assimilate them and de-religionize them and whatever.
Afraid of being seen locked up on as racist, for instance.
But it is racist.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree, but I'm just saying that
the problem is that is exactly racism, because what that behavior actually in reality shows is that women who look like us, our lives are not worth that of any average white Norwegian person. So that is racism, because you're saying it's my culture, or it's my background, or my traditions, or the men in my community get to dictate what my culture is. Why are we defining communities by the abusers and by violent men? Why is the definition of a community not her, or not people who are trying to make a better space, a more inclusive space for absolutely everybody? I would like to just refer to one of the points both of you were making, is in a perfect world, I wish, because there are so many people who are religious around the world. That's just not going to change.
And you can't get rid of us.
No, and that's okay. You know,
the other way around.
Well, exactly.
The religious are trying to get rid of us.
But I understand the need and the place for spirituality and for religion. I completely accept it and respect it, as long as it is people's private, personal, intimate matter. And my dream is, because there are that many religious people, that this religious leadership that you speak of, I so much wish that they would make use of that leadership and would speak to their followers and tell them about the dignity and humanity of all our citizens in the world, regardless of nation borders or gender borders, whatever the borders are, to be able to transcend that. But the fact of the matter is, that's not happening. No. This religious leadership has been tasked with that for a long time, and they've done nothing.
Let me give one example.
Yeah, just a very brief one, because I just,
I have also time to speak.
It's my decision.
It is your wish.
No.
We've taken
I'll give one illustration, because I think we need to, and I'm very inspired by the development where nuances are coming up. If you take the Rohingya issue in Myanmar, which has not been mentioned in the Norwegian media until the boat issue develops, but it has been a political issue for 2-3 years. 1.2 million Rohingyas of Bangladeshi descent have been living in Myanmar 3-4 generations.
A brief example, you said.
And then suddenly you see the Buddhist monks turn against them. And what is it? It is a racist issue. You speak about the color. It is a nationalist issue. They don't have national papers. It is a poverty issue, because they are on the lowest of all, and it is an ethnic issue. This is a complexity, and those who really are under the hardest oppression in that context are women and children. But the complexity of it is, religion is only one factor. But we see religion because it is Buddhist monks leading the onslaught on Muslims in this case.
Since we are in this context, and what is sort of happening more around our doors now because of the immigration that Europe has got the last 50 years, talking about this poverty issue, for instance, and religious issue, I know that you, Deeyah, you are actually doing a film now on jihadists from Europe. Who are they and why?
That's a lot of big questions. Okay.
Leading on from what Gunnar Stålsett just said.
My interest in making this film was to try to look at what is underneath all of this. What is it that makes a human being susceptible to a message like that? You know, we can all listen to messages of violence and of hatred, and most of us don't take that in. It doesn't become a part of who we are. We're able to keep it outside. So what is it in some people that actually it becomes them? And what I have found, you are going to be happy to hear, is what the soil that makes people susceptible inside them, it's not religion at the beginning. What makes people susceptible, it is social, it's emotional, it's psychological, it's cultural, it's driven by a feeling of injustice, a feeling of being outside, a feeling of being lesser than. It's a question of emasculation as well, and trying to regain my power. And if I feel as a human being, what I've learned from some of these guys, you know, they would say, you know, if I cannot be respected, at least I can be feared. Yeah? So a lot of the questions and the issues and the answers that I found are very basic, very simplistic human issues and feelings that we all actually grapple with. But the thing is, then religion does, of course, come into the picture, but it's not the beginning. For most people, the beginning is not that. The beginning is something internal, an internal conflict, a transition period in your life, and a specific point of vulnerability in people's lives. And then on top of that comes religion, comes politics, come foreign policy, come all these other things. Having said that, you know, we still can't say that those are the only reasons the people turn to this. You know, I was sitting with some of these guys, and they said, you know, I faced discrimination, I felt this, I feel alone, I feel this. And I'm sitting there saying, me too. I feel exactly the same. So why am I picking up a camera and you're picking up a gun?
Yeah. And why, you think?
Because they don't think they can do anything else. And also you have to remember, we are, as a society, as a people, we are also rewarding violence. And what I mean by that is we are rewarding their bad behavior, their violent behavior. Look at how much coverage in the news we give violence and give this behavior. So you're legitimizing their sense of self, even though they're villains. We're making them into rock stars. They're everywhere. They're feared, they're huge, they're strong, we are so scared of them. We're playing into their hands, and we're showing them that your violence actually matters. We're not saying that she matters. Yeah, she's sitting there non-violently plodding along for I don't know how many years she's been working. I mean, I've known her for a long time now, and she's not on the front covers. I just did a thing in Oslo where I wanted to celebrate the courage and the resistance and the compassion and creativity of women. We have been on the receiving end, women in the Muslim world have been on the receiving end of different formations of this movement for a long time. You're just seeing it now. We've had to suffer this for a long time. And we've been fighting them for a long time. And today, when it's knocking on the doorsteps of Europe, you have to stand with us. We all have to join together, but we must not become like them. We must not also move towards violence and towards hatred. I want people to understand each other better, not fall apart. And what's happening in Europe today is we are becoming more polarized. The distance between people is actually growing rather than bridging. And they're winning. They're winning, not us. So the reason he picks up the gun is because he knows he's going to get your attention.
Maryam.
Well, but But also I think it's because there's very limited alternatives out there for people who are angry, who want to resist. Yeah? When I was younger, I was angry. I joined the anti-apartheid movement. I joined the movement against the Islamic regime of Iran. These are progressive movements. And the problem is that our progressive movements are very much now aligned with the Islamists to a large extent. So even if I've met many ex-Muslims who, even British-born, white, for example, converts, who became converts to Islam after joining Stop the War Coalition, because it has become an avenue for young people who are opposed to the war to join the Islamists. Because they are working together, they have become one movement, in a sense. And because the rest of us on the left who are fighting on the front lines are invisible, people who are angry, young people who are angry, who are disillusioned, who faced racism, don't have many other visible alternatives, But the key is that I've also faced racism, I've also faced police brutality, I've also faced death threats. But still, we've chosen other ways, and I think we need to show young people that these other ways exist. Yeah. And part of that is the need for this visibility to be increased, that just isn't there.
And we have to include them. Yeah, they have to feel like they have a place in society where they can say, I'm against the war, I'm against the apartheid in Palestine and Israel, where they can say these things, ask questions.
But you said you had to stand with us.
Yes.
How?
Well, this helps. The way you stand with anybody is live the principles. We all have to live the principles that we preach. So if we say, I am for the liberation of women, or liberation of all human beings from fear and from violence, okay, or from oppression, I have to live by that, and I have to make sure that I mean that, not just for me. It's not good enough that I have it. That doesn't solve the problem. Then if I have it, then I have to reach my hand out and make sure that I can be there as support for somebody else. I think the easiest and most immediate and helpful way that people can do it is, don't let us stand completely alone. The feeling of loneliness is what breaks most of us. It's not the threats, but it's that feeling of loneliness of going, what am I going to do? I don't know what to do. I just need somebody to talk to.
Yeah, I think what you were saying about the root causes and the complexity of those, if you look at the Palestinian issue, often defined in contrast to Israel as Muslims on one side and Jews on the other side. It is not a religiously driven conflict. It is about the right to land, it is about freedom, it is about ownership, it is about justice, human rights. But the identifying role of religion, that which sort of bridges many of these factors, is very often used in a way where religion then is attacked and say, this is an expression of Jewishness or of Islam or of Hindu or whatever. But it is these social factors that are in many cases the driving element. If you look at ISIS, they say we do it to honor God. And they are doing the most horrendous things in the history of humanity, with murder and rape and violence in every sort. So there is no connect between their public outcry in the name of Allah and what they actually do. So to define this as a religious-based struggle is sort of hijacking of Islam and hijacking of God. And this also shows the complexity of the issue that we have.
We have 5 minutes left, and this is really a burning topic. Cecilie and then Maryam.
Okay.
I do not think it's a hijacking of Islam, and what we have been talking about here, it's not getting rid of religious people, as you said, but it's an important question to be able to criticize violent attitudes within the religions themselves and also in other parts of society, of course, but we have to start talking about religious influence in society, because if not, we will not move further on.
I think, you know, it's one thing to say that the situation is complex. It's another to try to remove blame from religion. And these are very different things. Religion is a key factor in this. But I do also always say that these movements, I call them religious right, because before they are religious, they are political movements, and that is for sure. But religion is their banner. And when your banner is Islam, when your banner is Buddhism, when your banner is Christianity, when your banner is Judaism, then we also have a responsibility to look at your banner, to review it, to criticize it, and hopefully put it in the dustbins of history. The reality of the matter is that people can believe what they want. They have a right to. But the more of a space we have to be able to criticize religion, the more we are able to take that banner away from the religious right. So I think while we're fighting first and foremost a political movement, criticism of religion, criticism of that which is taboo and sacred is also a fundamental task for us today, particularly because it is so misogynist. All the texts are misogynist. I disagree with using "in the name of God." It is God. This is religion. This is God.
We are almost there, and I just want to give each and every of you one challenge to sum up in one sentence. What can we do now then? Just one sentence. No, I can start with you. I will start with you.
Oh dear. Well, this is going to be very general because there are so many things one has to do. But what we have to start with, coming from Amnesty International, a human rights organization, you have to start with the rights of individuals and really claim the rights of individuals, the individuals being 7.5 billion or whatever people, men and women, all over the world. And you have to insist, and this is talking about religion giving pushback, this is also being pushed back from not only religions, but, you know, Putin and everybody. So that there has to be an insistence that every single human being has these rights, and that has to be voiced very clearly to religious leaders and even to your religious neighbor.
Yeah, that was more than one sentence, Gunnar
Yeah,
Stålsett.
it's impossible.
Education is at the heart of it. Last year we gave the Nobel Peace Prize to Malala, who stood up for the girls' rights, for women's rights, globally, and she did it at the cost of her life, but she survived. And I think that two areas which we have not specified here is the right for girl children for education and this fight against forced marriage. There is a campaign, Girls Not Brides, run by the elders, which are also related to the Nobel Peace Prize. And I think that these two examples connected to education indicate a strategy which makes it possible for us to work together and which gives promises for the future.
Deeyah.
I feel like I've said a lot, but all I would like to say is that I think we all have a responsibility to do whatever we can, whatever that means. I think our apathy permits violence. I think our apathy allows oppression and abuse to take place. Whoever the perpetrator is, whoever the victim is, I think we have truly the responsibility to do whatever we can, and whether that means speaking up, it means campaigning, or giving somebody a hug, it doesn't really matter, but do something, do anything. And we are very privileged to live in the part of the world that we live in. And so what good is that if it's not useful for somebody other than us? So do something, be a part of it.
I think for me, I would say key is secularism, is a demand for the separation of religion from the state. I think even with regards to education, you know, if people have access to education like Islamic schools or Jewish schools or Christian schools, that's still not good enough. So education alone isn't key, but an education that is free from religious indoctrination. The other key thing is solidarity, solidarity with each other and with people, living across the world. Our world is much smaller than we know, and much smaller than sometimes we realize. And what happens to Farkhonde affects us, just as what happens to Deeyah here affects women in Afghanistan and elsewhere.
Cecilie.
Well, I think all totalitarian ideologies, authoritarian ideologies, must be questioned all the time if we shall be able to create a society and a world which is civilized.
As we have done here today, and Maryam, you have put your leaflets down here at the stage, so please come by and pick up something on your way out. And I know that a few of you have wondered where is Yoko Ono's film, and it's shown out there on small screens, and you can listen to the voice through the headsets. So a few of you can be lucky out there. Thank you.
Deeyah is saying that's why
it's full. That's why it's so many of you.
It's not for us.
It's not for us. That's what it was.
Yeah, that was it was.